Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring something deeply fascinating, but also, well, kind of invisible. We're looking at the psychology of outgrowing childhood way too soon. For a lot of people, childhood wasn't exactly a time of carefree play and just figuring things out gradually. Honestly, it was more like a rushed assignment. And that specific experience, it literally wires your nervous system and shapes exactly how you interact with the world, well, into adulthood.
Psychology tells us there's no grand announcement for this. Nobody sits you down at 7 years old and says, "Hey, you're an adult now, ahead of schedule." Instead, it just sort of happens. You realize one day that someone in the room has to be the responsible one, and looking around, you figure, well, it might as well be me. So you step up, and in doing so, you quietly leave your own childhood in the rearview mirror.
I want you to take a second and really ask yourself, were you responsible for way more than a kid ever should be? Keep that question rolling around in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer. Whether you're thinking about yourself or maybe a partner or a close friend, understanding the psychological gears behind this early responsibility gives us a pretty profound window into human resilience.
Section 1. Defining parentification, the root cause.
The absolute core of this is a clinical term, parentification. Psychologists use this to describe an environment where a kid is suddenly expected to juggle heavy emotional loads long before their brain is developmentally ready for it. That could mean managing their own unguided emotions or, and this happens all the time, managing the emotions of the adults around them. To handle that kind of intense pressure, the child's brain has to adapt. And it does that by basically putting its own needs on mute, just to survive the unpredictable environment.
The ultimate lesson here, your feelings come last. And I really want to emphasize this point. These kids were not born naturally strong or inherently stoic. They learned to stay calm, they learned to fix complex problems, and they learned to project this aura of maturity simply because there was absolutely zero other option. Their strength wasn't a choice, it was a required survival tactic.
Section 2. The cost of independence. Survival independence and split maturity.
Developmental psychology shows us that when kids can't rely on consistent, stable support, they develop a very specific, almost extreme type of self-reliance. It's essentially a 3-step crash course in survival independence. First, you just stop asking for help. Next, you stop expecting comfort to even be an option. And finally, you just handle things alone. Even when you're carrying burdens no kid should ever have to touch, you literally train yourself out of needing anybody.
And that leads right into a phenomenon called split maturity. On the outside, these adults look incredibly capable, right? They're composed, they seem super wise for their age, ultra responsible. They're the one everybody relies on. But then, look at the internal reality. Inside, it's a completely different story. They struggle to trust anyone, they feel confused, they carry this heavy guilt, and they often feel totally unfulfilled emotionally. They just can't trust support, because historically, support has always had strings attached or vanished completely.
The reason for that massive disconnect is rushed emotional development. Because their psychological growth was put on fast forward, some parts of their personality matured way too early, like they became elite problem solvers, but other foundational emotional needs completely unmet. They literally never got the time or a safe enough environment to just learn how to need other people safely.
Section 3. Why rest feels dangerous. Uneasy rest and guilt for needing.
Now, this is wild, but chronic stress actually rewires the brain's baseline for safety. To someone who grew up like this, rest literally equals neglect or danger. If things are calm, their brain immediately goes, okay, what's about to go wrong? Why? Because in their childhood, peace was usually just the quiet right before the storm. Attachment research links this directly to a nervous system that is constantly on high alert. Sitting around doing nothing makes them crawl out of their skin, and they often feel like they only have value if they're actively being useful to someone else.
Because of that early adaptation, receiving care feels totally foreign. It doesn't feel warm or comforting, it actually feels alarming. Attachment research points out that they develop this deep-seated belief that if someone is taking care of them, they're automatically a burden. So what happens? They actively minimize their own needs. They'll literally apologize for wanting support, carrying around this immense guilt just for resting, asking for a favor, or leaning on anyone.
Section 4. The empathy shield. Guarded empathy.
Growing up in that environment demanded hyperattention, which creates this incredibly highly tuned awareness. We're talking about someone who can sense a tiny shift in a room's mood instantly. They anticipate problems miles before they happen, and they read people lightning fast. And it's not a magic trick. It was a necessary protective measure. Their nervous system was trained to scan and analyze everything so they could manage the adults around them and stay safe.
So they have this incredible capacity for empathy, but they also know exactly how much it costs to care without protection. Psychology highlights a really important dynamic here. Yes, they have razor-sharp emotional awareness, but they also intentionally keep themselves heavily guarded. They know the severe emotional toll of caring for someone who is unpredictable, so they build these massive walls to make sure they never get drained like that again.
Section 5. Permission to rest. The resolution.
If you're listening to this and nodding along, recognizing yourself, here is the absolute most important takeaway of this entire explainer. Psychology does not call you broken. Let me say that again. You are not broken. These traits, the hyperindependence, the guilt around taking a break, the guarded empathy, they aren't character flaws. They're actually the exact opposite. They are proof of a highly successful nervous system adaptation to immense early pressure. You literally did exactly what you needed to do to survive.
When we reframe this whole journey, it becomes clear. Your early lessons taught you responsibility long before you ever got to feel safe. You had to learn incredible strength before you were ever allowed to experience softness. But true healing, it doesn't mean becoming weak or losing your edge. Not at all. Healing just means overriding that old survival programming and learning that finally, you are absolutely allowed to rest.
So, I want to leave you with one final powerful thought. We've seen how this starts quietly, how it completely shapes your independence, your downtime, and your empathy. But the most crucial question moving forward is this: are you still carrying that weight? Take that thought with you today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.